Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, how are you? This Sunday evening, Kieran. It's unusual for us. We're recording on a Sunday evening. If your cunning plan was the further away we got from Saturday, the less I'd be likely to mention the Saturday's results, Kieran. I'm afraid that plan hasn't paid off. Because all it's done is given me more time to hook up on wine and happy thoughts. But apart from that, Kieran, I've sort of given it away how you are now, Kieran. That's terrible. If this is a drama, people will be turning off already. There's no jeopardy at all in this. How are you?
I'm absolutely fantastic. I saw New Order on Friday night.
Oh, that's nice.
Deacon Blue on Saturday night.
Oh, that's
and
good.
It was my granddaughter's second birthday party on Saturday afternoon. And we all spent a fortune buying her presents. And then we went out and collected conkers under the local horse chestnut tree. And she spent all of the time putting conkers from one cup into another, because that was far more fascinating than all of the plastic purchases we've made.
Well, she'll be amazed that Granddad knows exactly where to look for conkers for. I'm glad you pointed out the chestnut tree is a better place to look for them than anywhere else, Kieran. So, although I have to say, if my team had lost 6-1, the last thing I'd do on a Saturday evening is go and see Deacon Blue. That's not a mood changer, is it? It's just going to make who put me tickets for Deacon Blue when we were going to lose 6-1? Anyway, and enough of this. This will be the last time we mentioned it, Kieran. And I have to say, I'm disappointed with all our listeners who have been sending gleeful tweets, literally like les tricoteurs around the guillotine, looking forward to the banter that we had, just because Brighton lost 6-1, Palace beat Man United, and Millwall lost at home to Swansea. I have to say, Kieran, I was slightly disappointed with Ali's response. So we were watching Match of the Day together, and normally when a team loses, because we know so many people who support other teams, she'll say, "Oh, poor Terry, Liverpool lost. He'll be really upset." We started watching your game, and after 2-0, she went, "How many did Villa score in the end?" And I went, 6. It took about 5 minutes to stop laughing. She just kept going, poor Kieran. You'll be so upset. Just tell me you didn't hedge it, Kieran. You didn't have a bet on Brighton losing 6-1, did you?
I didn't have a bet on them losing 6-1,
okay.
But my emotions were suitably hedged.
Very good way of putting it. It's Questions Day, Kieran. We do have 2 big news stories, I'm afraid, both involving announcements by club owners. The first one of which, from the owner of Scunthorpe United, came as a surprise to fans of 2 clubs.
Yes, on Thursday afternoon, David Hilton put out an announcement effectively through the Scunthorpe United webpage, and he said he was no longer willing to fund the club, and that after Saturday's game, they would be playing all of their home games at Gainsborough Trinity, which was a shock for Scunthorpe fans. They'd made an absolutely superb start to the season, partly due to the fact that they've got a very competitive budget, but that's a separate issue. But an even bigger shock to Gainsborough Trinity, who responded by saying, "Hold on, nobody's mentioned this to us in terms of the matches." Yeah, they later clarified the situation and said that there was an outstanding agreement that, in theory, Scunthorpe could play matches at Gainsborough, but it had to be approved by the safety advisory group. So it's no means cut and dried. But there is a much bigger issue here, because it is the end of the month, and by all accounts, wages were not paid on the Friday. There is talk of county court judgments with regards to unpaid bills, and there's also talk, and we don't know how accurate this is, in relation to a significant amount of money being owed to HMRC for monies which, remember, have been deducted from people's pay and have been paid across by fans and other customers in terms of VAT. So it's a financial mess. Now, David Hilton is saying that he's withdrawn funding, that he's been getting abuse that he shouldn't be. And as an owner, a degree of grief comes with the territory, and I'm sure that as he's owned other clubs, I'm sure he must be aware of that. Anybody that has a go at a person's family, that's stepping over the line. Not denying that, but it's not good. Three directors have resigned by all accounts, and that's come through at Companies House. So we're not quite sure who or what is running the club at present. They lost 3-0 at home on the Saturday, but then if the players are of the opinion, well, we ain't going to be paid, or uncertainty about payment, I wouldn't go in for a 50-50 challenge in the knowledge that on Monday morning, but effectively I'm looking for a new job. If I'm not going to be paid, and therefore, why jeopardise my position of being an available asset to another club? So, David Hilton's tenure at Scunthorpe United, I think it's fair to say that there's been a lot happening in very little time. We have hinted at issues before. I think a lot of credit goes to some of the Scunthorpe fans who have looked into a variety of issues. Secondly, fans of Bury, even when Bury were in a very precarious position, they looked at David Hilton's background, and he started to conduct conversations with people on social media, and I wouldn't recommend that to anybody. It's a toxic place, as we both know, and it does mean that things don't always work out as you would like. So he withdrew his offer to acquire Bury, saying he was getting stick from fans at the time. I think you have to bring up his past, and here, Matt Slater and Phil Buckingham at The Athletic have done an awful lot of research. And Matt Slater's put out something, and we both know Matt is a very thorough, very fine investigative journalist, as is Phil. I've got to know them pretty well. And Matt said what they've written to date is effectively the first chapter of events which have happened in relation to Scunthorpe United over the course of the last 7 to 8 months. We had our Discord chat on Thursday night, and there was somebody from Scunthorpe there. They gave us bits of information. I'll be honest, I am being guarded in what I say, because ultimately all I care about is that there is a Scunthorpe United to follow. That's the preeminent thing. There are a firm of accountants, according to David Hilton, who are looking at the state of the company's finances with a view to trying to ensure that creditors are paid. But the vast majority of these contracts will have been signed by David Hilton himself, certainly the playing contracts and sponsorship deals for this season and so on. So it does make you feel uncomfortable. And my concern is that if I was that firm of accountants looking at what you can do in respect of Scunthorpe, one option is always to consider going into administration. But Scunthorpe United don't own the property assets. They don't own Glanford Park. So the first thing I'd be saying is, well, what have I got to sell? And I've effectively got the name of the club to sell, and that's about it. And that's not going to settle all of the outstanding debts. So it's not good. I really would caution against this being conducted through Facebook and other social media means if people want to progress this. A huge amount of credit has to go to the Scunthorpe United fans message board. That they set up a GoFundMe page to try to help people who haven't been paid on Friday. I think it's raised well over £50,000 the last time I looked. And that's come from fans of all clubs. That's come from rival fans as well. And it was exactly the same for Brighton in 1996, 97. You know yourself as you did a benefit gig, and we had a Fans United where fans say, I don't want Brighton to win matches. I hate Brighton, but I still want a Brighton to hate. And it's the same if you're a fan of Grimsby or other clubs in the broad vicinity as well. So Jason Stockwood, who we know, the owner of Grimsby Town, he's put £500 into the GoFundMe page. But then another slightly uneasy issue here is who distributes that money to the employees, because we want to make sure that it gets to the right people. And there is a trust issue here. Everybody's entitled to rehabilitation, but David Hilton is a convicted criminal in respect of fraud. And would you give £50,000 to a person with that background? I think you'd have to have an awful lot of trust in them for that to be the case. So an overall complete mess.
It was quite heartening, Kieran, on our Discord chat the other night, which went on for an hour and could have easily been longer, that all the other fans, we had a couple of people, Scunthorpe fans basically, who did have some access to inside information, it seemed, but all the other people on the conversation were rallying around and just expressing their prayers and hopes that this situation doesn't develop even further. Unfortunately, it looks really grim at the moment, Kieran. There are two things I meant to check myself last night, but as you can imagine, I was celebrating. Plus, it was a really good Strictly Come Dancing last night, really cracking. So I didn't get round to it. The second is the first one, Robert. What are the National League thoughts on a club arbitrarily announcing it's moving its venue for the rest of the season? Because that's going to have a significant effect, you would imagine, on the club's ability to stay up, you would think. And secondly, is that not going to have a significant impact on their match day income? I'm guessing Gainsborough Trinity is a smaller ground, and I'm guessing that quite a few Scunthorpe fans, this will be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and they're going, well, I'm not going to go. So I don't see how this can in any way be described or spun as a positive move for Scunthorpe.
No, it's not. I mean, the National League will go through its handbook. I think Scunthorpe are allowed to play at other grounds, but then you've got the coordination of fixtures. So, what happens if Scunthorpe are due to play a home game based on the current fixture calendar on the same day as Gainsborough? Having matches taking place 24 hours after each other, well, that's not going to please the groundsman. And that's going to involve a lot of organisation, and you can imagine local residents might not necessarily be happy. In terms of the impact upon matchday income, Scunthorpe have been getting excellent crowds home and away, but as you rightly say, if we saw what happened when Coventry City ended up going to Northampton, Birmingham City, and I think for one match to Burton.
Yeah.
And it is a hardcore. That's not to disparage any of the people that choose not to go, because they might have other commitments, they might have travel concerns, they might have family commitments, and so on. So it will have an impact upon the club's finances. And where does it leave the contracts which have been signed in good faith by players? Scunthorpe, by all accounts, were one of the few, I think, full-time teams in National League North. That gives them a competitive advantage on the pitch, but not a competitive advantage if those players aren't being paid.
Well, also, you've got contracts with caterers as well, for example. That's going to be affected by the change of venue, you imagine. And on Friday, Kieran, you wait all year for a ballsy statement from a club owner, and then we got the second one in a week from the Sheffield Wednesday owner, David Hilton, which is not only ballsy, it's quite chippy and somewhat provocative as well.
Yes. I think it's fair to say that, again, we're only a couple of chapters into the reign of Mr. Chansiri, and he has been, at times, he's been a figure of fun, sponsoring the club through a taxi company which had neither taxis nor a telephone number at the time. That did raise eyebrows. Sheffield Wednesday were promoted at the end of last season. Congratulations to them for that, worthy promotion. And the first thing he does is he sacks the manager and accuses the manager of asking for too much money. He doesn't have a background in football. His wealth would appear to come from family success rather than individual success. And he has said that he is going to withdraw funding from the club. He says that valid criticism is part and parcel. We're used to that. But he's made claims that his family and children have been abused. Now, nobody's seen this, so there's no evidence of it on social media. And I think, to be fair to Sheffield Wednesday fans, the ones that I've observed on Twitter and so on, they say, well, we would not tolerate this type of thing. We don't think he's very good at his job, but we're all adults, or rather, the vast majority of us are adults, and we can distinguish between having a go at an owner or a player and stepping over the mark in terms of family abuse. So where this leaves Sheffield Wednesday in terms of its finances is uncertain. They've made a very poor start to the season. The fans are unhappy. They would appear to have a relatively low budget, and they're a club that, again, don't own their own ground because, as we saw with Scunthorpe, in the case of Scunthorpe, the previous owner sold the ground effectively to himself to write off some of the debts owed to him. And in the case of Sheffield Wednesday, Delphon Chansiri sold the stadium. This was a wheeze to get around financial fair play excesses, but he messed that up as well, and they ended up with a points deduction and, sadly, relegation. And we've always said, what goes on the pitch should dictate what happens as far as tables are concerned. So it's messy. In both instances, it's creating a lot of uncertainty. In both instances, the owners are claiming it's not me, I can take it, but my family, that's too far. And I absolutely agree. If there is evidence to support that, then there are appropriate steps to go through. But all I can say that we're both working people. If one of my students calls me a twat in class, I don't say to the whole class, right, I'm not going to write references for you. I'm not going to review your exams. I'm not going to give you any assistance when you need it, because that's punishing everybody for the misdeeds of one individual. And surely that is the appropriate way to behave. You don't target a whole group of people for the actions of a one or two.
Well, I would. I'm a sulking. I can't bear too mature people talking things out. I just do classic full-on sulk. I would say to the rest of the students, if you want to know why I've not marked your paper or given you a reference, ask Tim. Take it out with him. He called me. Has any of your students called you a twat, Kieran?
What one did, when I was teaching at Manchester.
Cheeky sod, did he?
Yeah. He stuck his head round the door. He says, "Maguire, you're a twat."
Why? Deliberately, he went out of his way to do it.
Oh, yeah.
It didn't just happen in conversation. He just, wow. The Chansiri statement, Kieran, was quite long, and there were almost comedic elements of "Hold My Pint" in it. There was one bit in particular where he said, like many of you, I'm afraid I wasn't born in Sheffield. And he added to that, and I have no plans to die here either, which is kind of quite funny in a bleak sort of way. But if you're a Sheffield Wednesday fan, basically you've got your owner saying, I'm not putting any funds into this club anymore, but also saying, I'm not finding somebody else who will be doing that. I don't know. So you'd be really worried as a fan. I imagine as a player and a manager, you'd be really worried. And also what was noticeable on Friday night, Ken, I remember the last time I saw a Sheffield Wednesday game was the playoff, the second leg, when they that remarkable comeback against Peterborough when Hillsborough was full. And I know it's a cliche, but it was rocking and it was fantastic. And it was far from full the other night, Kieran, and it was far from rocking as well. So these are fans that are clearly, I know ticket prices are quite high at Sheffield, but suddenly you're turning up or not turning up, and the bloke who owns your club says, that's it, I'm pulling the plug. That's a worrying development, is it not?
It is. I mean, I think the good news is that we've not heard anything with regards to the non-payment of September wages.
Right,
so
okay.
At least that gives the club a little bit of leeway with regards to the next significant financial outgoing. So that is a positive. But as you rightly say, Sheffield Wednesday ticket prices have been a cause for concern for Wednesday fans and for away fans. And the merchandise prices, again, I've seen Sheffield Wednesday fans comment, it's made by exactly the same manufacturer as other clubs in our division. So why are we being asked to pay £10 less? And Chansiri's response is, well, if you bought more of them, I'd lower the prices. But I don't think he's necessarily going to be held to his word with regards to that. So there is a cause for concern because people they won't be turning up for the next home game as a walk-up fan, given the start to the season that they've had. So where is the income going to come from, which is going to allow the club to pay the October wage bill if Chansiri holds to his word? Now, that is an if, because I think he is quite a combustible character. There is no doubt that he has historically put significant sums into the club through a variety of means. But, it's not good.
questions, Kieran, and the first question is, how do you pronounce the name of the person who's asked this question? I was going to try and Google this last night, but I was busy falling in love with Angela Rippon for the second time in my life. I'm going to go for Cian Hade, but it's Cian and then Hade, and it's 8 letters, 2 short names that have given me a world of pain. So if Cian, Cayenne, Chian, maybe you don't pronounce the C, Kieran. Maybe it's one of those posh names where it's just Ian. I don't know. But if they could let me know, I'd be most grateful, because it's like having a crossword clue you can't solve. But it's a good question. And Cian says, could you explain the Sara Björk Gunnarsdóttir case and the impact it looks set to have for workers' rights in women's football? I need to work on my Icelandic accent as well.
Yes, Sara Björk Gunnarsdóttir.
Very good.
She was originally an Icelandic player. She was successful, and she went to play elsewhere. And she ended up playing for Olympique Lyonnais. And she became pregnant. She had a child, and fantastic. You wish all young families health and happiness,
of course.
But the football club didn't pay her, and she put in a claim via the Footballers' International Union called FIFPro, and this went through to FIFA. And FIFA in January this year ruled in favour of Sara. And I think this was quite a landmark case, because there is a sniffy attitude towards female players who have children, and they should be entitled to exactly the same rights as any individual who starts a family. So the response of Olympique Lyonnais was to say, well, we would have given her some money, but French law prevented us from doing that. And that would appear to be nonsense. I wasn't aware of Victorian attitudes in French legislation. Now, as you know, we are fairly experienced pub lawyers, but that's British pub lawyers rather than French. So our knowledge of French employment law with regards to maternity rights is unknown. But that looked like a bit of a get-out clause. Olympique Lyonnais, I think they're trying to put pressure on. They did not offer her alternative employment. They showed no interest in her personal circumstances whatsoever, which is just tawdry and shabby. And that doesn't matter whether you're a football club or any employee. These are the people that work for you, and it's a hugely important part of their lives. So it just it doesn't reflect well on the club. I think at the time the club was owned by a Chinese private equity organisation, and I've got to be honest, as you know, I'm not the biggest fan of private equity. I can assure you, nobody in private equity gives a damn about football, but everybody in private equity does give a damn about making money. And if this was a way that they saw of saving a few quid, then they go along and take this. It was €82,000, but I think it is a landmark case, because clearly FIFA have acted on behalf and in favour of the player. So that's where we are, and it has set a position going forwards that you would expect all clubs would therefore have to adhere to.
It's 2023, Kieran. I don't know much about French employment law, I have to say, which is a lie, because I know nothing about French employment law. By saying I don't know much, it implies I have a minimal knowledge. I don't. But these days, Kieran, fathers are given time off when they've had a baby. I'm fairly certain mothers are as well in France. I know this was a different ownership, but everything I start to hear about Olympique Lyonnais is starting to really annoy me as a Palace fan, obviously. And also their women's team was enormously successful. I believe they're trying to, or I believe John Textor is trying to offload the women's team, but their women's team has been enormously successful. So this is not the way. I apologise in advance for using the word asset here, but this is not how you treat an enormously successful asset, is it? It's not good. It's not good, and it needs resolving. And hopefully, whatever, I'm sure we would. we'll have silver-tongued French lawyers. I imagine French lawyers are even more silver-tongued than our lawyers, Kieran. That'd be much more cool than our lawyers, a French lawyer. Imagine how well-dressed.
Nobody can be cooler than Nick DeMarco.
Oh, I don't know. Imagine some of those French lawyers, Kieran. Imagine how well-dressed they would be. I'll tell you what, when we're on Jersey, we'll get a chance to check, because they're sort of half. Are they half? I'm going to get out. Are they half French? I'll do a bit of research about the geography and history of Jersey before I get there, Kieran. Alex Brown has a question. It's something that we have discussed before. Oh, right, that's not fair, Alex. It's something that we get asked in pubs a lot, because people still don't fully understand what counts towards FFP and what doesn't. And Alex Brown says, does FFP spending include money spent on infrastructure, training facilities and youth development? And I'm almost expecting a one-word answer, Kieran, here.
Well, there is a one-word answer in that, yes, it does. Just to expand upon that, under the present rules, if you have infrastructure spending, so if you think about all the money that Spurs spent on their new stadium, we've got Liverpool expanding theirs, Manchester City potentially expanding theirs, Chelsea thinking of doing something with the cash that they're trying to borrow at present, all of those costs are excluded from your FFP losses. And that goes for training facilities as well. When it comes to youth development, academy costs, again, are excluded from the calculations. And I think you have to be just a little bit cautious here, because we both know people who are employed within the sports industry, within the football industry. We both know journalists who talk to people in the sports industry as well. I know somebody who's an academy manager of a Category 1 academy, and he says, my official budget is £6 million, and that's what goes into our club's FFP calculations. But my actual budget is £2 million, because what's happening is costs are being charged to the academy, but he's not actually seeing any of the benefits. So he's ended up having to buy the cones, having to buy the bibs, and he's a dedicated person. He wants to encourage these young people in terms of their pathway into the professional game, but it is frustrating. So that is one of the routes. And also, if you have a women's team, your women's team, if it's losing money, those losses are excluded, and community schemes as well.
So we've got a secret academy manager now as well, have we?
We have. Yeah, our Christmas party is Secret Santa is going to be very busy.
Well, everyone's going to have to be in separate rooms, Kieran, because otherwise we'll know who they are. But last week we had an imaginary scenario where we took on Gary Oldman to run all these moles. We're going to have to, his budget's going to have to really go up. Also, £2 million, that's a lot of bibs. £2 million.
That's a lot of bibs.
I've seen the Screwfix advert on Sky during Champions League games, and I know how it works. You just find yourself on the pitch with a mobile phone, you tap a little number and loads of bibs turn up. I'm sure that's the realistic way it happens. Stuart Edgar has a question for us, Kieran. Excuse me. And it's a good question, but listeners will have to pay attention here as to Club A and Club B. And I'm not going to read out the brackets all the time, because I will be saying open brackets, close brackets quite a lot. But Stuart Edgar's question is this. I was hoping you might be able to shed some light. When a player is signed by Club A, there are frequently associated contract clauses which entitle the previous club, Club B, to a percentage of future transfer fees. However, if a player runs down his contract with Club A and the contract expires, but is then re-signed by Club A after this contract expiry, is Club B still entitled to associated contract clauses such as future sell-on percentages?
Right. I spoke on this occasion to our very good friend, the secret lawyer, the secret sports lawyer.
Uh-huh.
And he gave me his standard answer, which was, it depends, Kieran, and at length went on to an explanation.
Kieran, we need a new secret lawyer. Because that's his answer to everything for you. Either we need to pay this lawyer properly and name him, and in which case we might get decent legal advice.
Or her.
Very good, Kieran, except, damn, I've given away a clue now. Because one thing I do know is the gender have said, this is why I'm not running the secret. If I'd been parachuted into France the day before Normandy, the whole thing would have been called off. If I was caught, I wouldn't take a lot of torturing before I told the Gestapo everything. It's 5 beaches. Canadians on one, the Americans on two. Yes, so it depends on what, Kieran?
Well, it depends upon the small print of the contract. So let's take a scenario. So let's say that Crystal Palace are Club A and Reading are Club B. So what has happened here is that Palace have signed a player from Reading on a 4-year contract. And we're now at the end of that contract. And the player says, well, I'm not going to re-sign. And Palace say, well, we don't want you back. And then 4 or 6 weeks later, they realise that they were really made for each other. So the player comes back. And then 6 months later, Palace sell the player. Now, are Reading entitled to a share of the proceeds, given that it's more than 4 years from the original sale of what they would say is their player? And in theory, the player has signed a new registration. So therefore, if there was nothing in the original contract which allowed for a follow-up contract at Palace, then Palace would keep all of the money. If, however, the small print said that until this player ceases to be a Crystal Palace player under any way, shape or form, we are entitled to a sell-on, then that would be to the benefit of Reading.
Okay, I'm so childish, Kieran, that I'm really pleased you made Palace Club A in that scenario, because if you'd made us Club B, I would have been quite chippy, and I would have said it's because you lost 6-1 at the weekend and you're taking it out on me. Our next question, Kieran, comes from Joe Wolf. I mean, what a great name. Joe Wolf is a cracking name, although I imagine he was quite pleased to leave school, I'm guessing. He couldn't wait to be 18 and get out into the big wide world where being called Wolf wasn't quite as funny to grown-ups. But Joe Wolf is interested in how Manchester City can have the highest revenue of all clubs worldwide. And he actually says it shocks me that that's true. I can understand a drop for Real Madrid and Barcelona, says Joe, with the way things are in Spain. But with the fan support of clubs like Man United and Liverpool in the Premier League selling out at every game, and Man City often having empty seats at home, what is it that I am missing, please? Now, those empty seats won't imply that people haven't bought them. They're probably season ticket holders who haven't turned up, I imagine, Kieran.
Yes, I think we need to look as far as all clubs are concerned as to where income is generated. We've always said that there's 3 streams. First of all, you've got broadcast income. Now, in the case of Manchester City, they will be very much at the top tier of Premier League broadcast income because it's based on the number of appearances and where you finish in the table. Well, Manchester City have won the Premier League for the last few seasons. Then if we take a look at UEFA broadcast monies, those are distributed limited or linked to your historic success in the competition. Well, Manchester City made the final in 2021, the semi-finals in 22, and they won it in 23. So they've got a very high coefficient from UEFA. They also won the competition and they won the Super Cup as well. So there's lots of positives as far as broadcast income is concerned. When it comes to matchday income, Manchester City only generate half of the amount of money from compared to Spurs, because we know that the Spurs' new stadium's the new White Hart Lane is very much a money-making vehicle, and Manchester United, and this is where I think it's an opportunity for a bit of tribalism, a bit of point scoring. Manchester City do not have the same size of an international stroke tourist fan base that the likes of Manchester United, Liverpool, Real Madrid or Barcelona have. Nobody is denying that, certainly not City fans, but they do have a growing fan base, certainly with regards to that. If you go to Spurs grounds for a home fixture, we've both seen the number of South Korean fans who are desperate to see their hero, and they are very, very lucrative. So clubs like tourist fans because A, you charge them much higher prices for individual match tickets compared to season ticket prices, and B, they are far more likely to go to the megastore and spend an absolute fortune on merchandise and other products. So that Manchester City are at a significant disadvantage or decrease compared to its peer group. Our third income stream is commercial, and I think this is the provocative one. This is what has effectively led to the charges being levelled by the Premier League and historically by UEFA. Manchester City generate over £300 million a year from commercial partners and sponsorship. And the critics say that some of those contracts are not at market rates. Manchester City say they are. But talking to people in the game, the common response I get is, well, yes, they're not as global in terms of fan base as some of these other clubs, but sponsors love them because they've got some very iconic people at the club. Pep Guardiola is a cool person to have next to your products. The same with Kevin De Bruyne, the same with Haaland, the same with Jack Grealish. So they have got some pretty high-profile players. And secondly, they can offer the big trophies. Do you want your product next to the Champions League trophy, next to the Premier League trophy? Well, if you do, you have to pay a bit extra for the privilege. And people are prepared to pay for that privilege. And that has been a contributory factor. We will wait, and we will probably wait a long, long time before we know the judgment with regards to the charges. But that is the driving force. It is very much the commercial income. And Manchester City are expanding the Etihad to more than 60,000 seats. They wouldn't do that if they were failing to sell tickets. So I think it is a bit of a myth. Are there empty tickets? So are there empty seats on 80, 85 minutes when City are 2 or 3 up from a home match? Yes, there are. But, I suspect that there were quite a few empty tickets or empty seats at Old Trafford yesterday. There certainly were when Brighton played a couple of weeks ago when United were 3-1 down going into injury time. And that's not having a go at the fans. Fans have got to go home. Whenever you're taking a stuffing at home or whenever you're cruising at home, there tends to be empty seats because people will say, I can get a quicker train home, or I want to see Strictly, or I want to see this, that, and the other. And people say, well, there's no jeopardy left in the game, so let's go home.
I can only apologise to Man United fans, Kieran. There's no need for you to crowbar in the reference to you winning there a couple of weeks ago and the fact that you won by more than we won there on Saturday. But there again, we lost by less than you did at Villa. So I think in the United-Villa matchup, I think we're slightly ahead in the table. And this next question comes from Christian Roel Ferreira, another cracking name. And I suspect that Christian may have been in a pub or a coffee shop with some friends. And this came up as a discussion point. And they thought, I know what we'll do. We'll send it in to Kieran Maguire. He'll sort this one out. But Christian said, I was thinking about Chelsea's current transfer business and a novel idea came up. Can everyday people use the amortisation practice, or is this reserved for the sports industry? It's something I've never given credit to, Kieran, but I'm guessing if producer Guy could find a way to amortise the money we get paid for this, he would have done that long ago, wouldn't he?
He's paying you. He's not paying me.
Is he not?
Is this a revelation that has been kept from me?
Well, I say pay. He's asked me to let it sit in my bank account until it all blows over, Kieran, in true Father Ted style.
Okay. Right. The reason why we have amortisation, what are you amortising? Well, you are amortising the transfer fee. And the reason why you're amortising the transfer fee, again, if let's use a Palace example. When Palace sold Aaron Wan-Bissaka to Manchester United, he still had 2-3 years remaining on his contract. So Manchester United wanted to sign him. The player was keen to move. Palace said, well, hold on, he's our player. We've got a contract which says that he can only play for us for the next 3 years. You've got to give us compensation. So that is the transfer fee. And it is that transfer fee that's amortised over the length of the contract. That doesn't tend to be the case as far as other jobs are concerned. So, if Gary Lineker phones us both up and says, I want to do a podcast with you, I hear producer guy's not paying you very much. So we go and work for Gary Lineker. We just say to Guy, cheerio, we're off, just as you do it in most jobs, because you're not tied to a future contract. Therefore, there's no issue. Where you potentially could have amortization, however, is if you are in a job, and this does perhaps impact upon the finance industry, where you've got very successful hedge fund managers and deal makers and so on, where you perhaps have a contract which says that if you are planning to move to another employer who is within our industry, you've got to do perhaps 2 years worth of gardening leave. And if your prospective new employer says, well, actually, we'd really like you to join now, what we'll do, we'll go to your existing employer and we'll give them £10 million compensation to release you from your gardening leave. What they could then do is to say, well, you've got to work for us for 4 years, a bare minimum, in order to get your bonuses. So therefore, we'll amortize the compensation that we pay. But for the vast majority of jobs, I've moved from university, I've moved from the world of accounting, my start of my career, where I was working in retail. I'll say no more than that. And I went into accounting. No compensation and no amortization was paid.
I know that Gary Lineker does occasionally listen to this pod, Kieran. So, Gary, if you are listening, you've got my number. We'll be very sorry to say goodbye to Producer Guy, but I'm sure there will be other opportunities for him elsewhere. I know for a fact Producer Guy is a big fan of Alan Shearer and Mika Richards. So, Gary, you could kill two birds with one stone. Kieran can do Mika's laugh. I can swear like Alan Shearer if necessary. Just saying. Another strong name, Kieran. Asks our next question. Benjamin Garthwaite. That's a strong name.
That's a good northern name, isn't it?
You'd imagine. I can't imagine Benjamin being anywhere else other than from Yorkshire. I imagine Benjamin knows his way around a stone wall, a dry stone wall at that as well. My cousin's from Yorkshire. It's one of the things, if you have an argument about what's better, London or Yorkshire, after the inevitable drink price comparison, he will get really cross and go, you haven't got any walls. So we've got loads of walls. We just do ours with plaster and mortar like normal people. We don't just stick dry stones on top of each other. Tweet him, everybody. How would I? I'm an effete city boy. I wouldn't know what you do with dry stone walls. But they keep sheep out, I'm sure. Benjamin Garthwaite says, it seems there is some confusion among Man United fans about whether an acquisition would mean the new owner still has to pay off the Glazers' LBO debt. Having done some private equity type transactions myself, I know many are done on a cash-free, debt-free basis. Would this be the case for Man U as well? And are there any specific rules that would apply to Premier League clubs? I like the way Benjamin drops in the having done some private equity type transactions myself in a kind of Uncle Terry type way. What's the LBO debt, Kieran?
That's for leverage buyout. So that means what happens is you take over a company, but you can't afford to buy it yourself. So therefore, you borrow money secured on the assets of the company that you've just acquired. And that's what the Glazer family did to Manchester United in 2005. Cash-free, debt-free means that when you acquire that company, its old bank balance and its old loans have to be settled by the former owners.
Right.
So this could be the case in respect of Manchester United. It is certainly common in all what you call major city lending for there to be something called a change of control clause, which means that, and again, if you look at it from a personal finance point of view, if I had a house with a mortgage, the mortgage company has assessed me. If I sold that house to you and it said, right, here he is, this is the agreed price. Oh, and by the way, you're taking over my mortgage. The lender might say, well, hold on, we don't know, Kevin. We therefore we're not certain whether we would be willing to lend, and so on. So it's a case of the lender making sure that their security is protected. Now, it could be that the new owners who come in for Manchester United, they like the cut of their jib and they say, well, we're quite happy to roll over the loan because Manchester United's a cash cow. We'll get our interest on the due dates. We're quite happy with the interest rate and so on. But they reserve the right to recall the loan in the terms of the takeover. And what they tend to do is sort of to formally cancel loan one and then effectively set up an identical loan for the new owners.
If that rhetorical lender listens to this pod, Kieran, they definitely wouldn't be happy with me taking over the mortgage, would they? They'd be putting their foot down left, right and centre. Our next question, Kieran, comes from Steve-O. And I'm guessing that's probably a Steve-O as in a sort of South London Steve-O, rather than Steve-O from Jackass, who I worked with once. I was very excited about working with Steve-O from Jackass because I thought, well, this is going to be a week of fireworks being stuck up people's arses and going down mountains in shopping trolleys. But it turns out to be a very serious chap. It was a bit more dull than I imagined it was going to be. And actually quite picky when it came to scripts. But Steve-O says, my question concerns the funding of the Premier League charitable foundations. As Kevin has mentioned, he's a trustee of the CPFC Foundation. I thought he would appreciate being asked to take the limelight away from Kieran on a financial matter. I'll be honest with you, Steve-O, I don't appreciate it that much. Kieran is a legendary football finance expert, and I asked half-assed questions and get geography wrong. So I'm perfectly happy with the roles we've been assigned. But Steve says, a friend of mine's daughter got a job working on a community scheme for a Premier League club's official foundation, and I gleaned a bit of an insight as to how these organisations operate. I was blown away by the extent of some of the community projects they were involved in. However, one matter that did come up was the nervousness within the foundation staff about the team's on-pitch performance, as the implication was that if a team were to be relegated, the foundation would potentially lose their Premier League funding, and this would directly impact the jobs of the staff working within the foundation. I may have picked this up incorrectly, but if not, excuse me, could you explain how this works? And also what a general funding method for a foundation would be, how they actually raise those funds, and what happens if relegation comes along. You've got it absolutely right, Steve-O. Everybody, and I only know about Premier League foundations. Most clubs have a foundation or a charitable charitable arm, and all of them are funded in various ways. And relegation will affect every single one of them, as it does to the club in general. So, a club gets relegated at the end of the season, Kieran, and fans of other clubs go, oh, well, that's a shame, or I don't care, depending on whether they like them or not. But what they don't realise is that people will be made redundant at the end of it because of budget cuts that have to come along. And it's the same in foundations. Everton, everybody in the Premier League seems to agree that Everton has got one of the best foundations in the country. They do incredible work in an area you know well, Kieran, and in an area that needs help, to be perfectly honest, where young people need all sorts of help. But Everton, the trustees of the Everton Foundation and every single one of the staff at the Everton Foundation are having the same panic this year as they would have had in the last 2 seasons, because relegation from the Premier League, it leads to a substantial hit on finances. Like most foundations, we certainly do it. You come up with 2 budgets for at the start of each season. You basically set your budget for the start of next season, and you have 2. You have one for staying up and one for going down. Now, these figures are pretty much correct. These might be last year's figures, because I emailed a couple of the financial people at the foundation to make sure I was saying the right thing. They both panicked immediately and emailed me back to say, can't Kieran do it? It might be much better if we talk to Kieran. Kieran can have our email. So I'm already discovering, Kieran, that your job's much harder than I thought. Just talking about financial stuff's tricky, isn't it? Really? Basically, each Premier League club from the Premier League itself gets £230,000 a season. If you're relegated, then that goes down to 90,000. So you get a sort of parachute payment for the first season that you're relegated. So you're losing a substantial amount of your budget straight away. You also lose access to up to £250,000 a year for each club from certain community funds that the Premier League will start that you're allowed to apply for. So you lose access to that as well. So it's a substantial hit. It also means that you have to work much harder then on fundraising for. Otherwise, you're going to lose programs. You're going to lose projects, and that's what will happen. The inevitable result of relegation means that fitness programs for youngsters, mental health programs for youngsters, work around knife crime and gangs, all sorts of. We could be here all day if we started going into some of the stuff that we do in the 4 boroughs around Crystal Palace. So, like a lot of charities, foundations rely on donations. They rely on legacies. They rely on fundraising, things like comedy nights. We're doing the Marathon March, walking 26 miles in 2 weeks. It's the 7th season that we've done it. Last year, we raised about £105,000, I think. But then mostly what you're looking at is that every foundation will have someone whose job pretty much full-time is applying for grants from local authorities and from local companies, from local philanthropic companies. And those grants might be for specific projects within a community, or they may be just for general funding. But after the Premier League, most of the funding will come from one-off grants or general grants. So, and with great pleasure, Kieran, I'm going to hand back to you, because I'm panicking. How do you do it, Kieran? See, this is why I don't like doing improv. It's difficult and it's not funny, as we've just discovered.
Well, I just do mind maps and shout out amortization randomly, and
that's
I've managed to fool the audience to date.
Well, that also goes for our love life as well, Kieran, to be perfectly honest. We've been getting away with that for quite some time. Anyway, I'm much more looking forward to this next question, Kieran, because without giving too much away, it's going to give me a chance to laugh at your current predicament, which is not... I don't know. It's a question from Gareth Spicer, and Gareth says, without wishing to annoy Kevin, I am one of Kieran's fellow Brighton and Hove Albion fans who are quite enjoying life at the moment. Are you, Gareth? Are you? You 5 o'clock yesterday evening, you enjoying life? That's called hubris, that is, Gareth. That Shakespeare used it quite often. That's pride going before a fall, that is, Gareth. When Gareth was emailing this question a couple of weeks ago, he's going, we're in Europe. I'll just give a little shout out to Brighton and tease Kevin about what's happening. And so it's your fault, Gareth, that Brighton lost 6-1 yesterday, just saying. But Gareth has a good question, Kieran. He says that given our experiences of 20, 30 years ago, having our club run by men and women with such clear devotion and basic common sense can leave us a little delirious at times. However, one policy the club has appeared to adopt under Bloom and Barber does puzzle me. Quite a few of our squad joined the club on an undisclosed transfer fee, and it seems that Brighton do this more than most clubs. What is the benefit of leaving fees undisclosed for both the buying and selling clubs? And does this have to be mutually agreed as part of the deal? Additionally, who does the fee have to be declared to? The FA, Premier League, HMRC, etc.
Well, I think there's 3 questions there to unpack, and I'll do those in reverse order. As far as declaring the fee to the FA and the Premier League and HMRC, that has to be done, because when the transfer of the player's registration takes place, all of the paperwork includes not just the transfer fee itself, but also the dates at which the individual elements, the individual instalments of that transfer fee have to be paid. So the information is in the football domain, but it doesn't tend to go into the public domain. Now, part of this is to do with the nature of the owner. Tony Bloom is a professional poker player. Now, anybody that's ever played poker will say that sometimes if you win a hand, it's because you're playing the opponent. You're not necessarily playing their cards. You're playing the opponent. You're recognizing ticks. You're recognizing whether they're aggressive, defensive players, and so on. And sometimes you will win a hand by bluffing. And what you do is that if they pay for you to reveal your hand, then you show it. But if they don't, you just say, I've won the hand, and you don't disclose. So what you're doing is that you're creating an air of mystery. You're creating an air of uncertainty amongst the people with whom you're competing. Well, Brighton's view is that that's what we have to do as far as the transfer market is concerned. Brighton still have a bottom 6 budget as far as the Premier League is concerned. So therefore, it's a case of both buying and selling smarter as best they can. So they don't tend to reveal transfer fees. Most other clubs don't care particularly. Some clubs like to make statements. So, in the case of Caicedo, it being a record fee, I think Chelsea were keen to present that to their fans. Say, look, we've just signed the most expensive player in the history of domestic transfers. But Brighton prefer not to do that, because if other clubs don't know how much they've received or how much they've spent, they can't second guess when they're next trading with Brighton how much to charge them for a player. So if Caicedo goes, they're looking to bring in a replacement, well, how much have they got? If you don't know the fee, it gives Brighton just a tiny edge as far as negotiations are concerned. And that's the only way that a club with a limited budget can punch above its weight. It's by having a series of very, very marginal gains which it utilises within the industry.
That surprises me a little, Kieran, because there's no doubt that Brighton are an incredibly well-run club at the moment. They have plans. Their recruitment, both on and off the pitch, is exceptional. They're a very good team to watch. It breaks my heart to say, but they are. But one of the things that is always mentioned in the media loving with Brighton is how astute they are in the transfer market, how they scour the world for bargains and they pay very little for players that eventually are sold on for a huge profit. So if we don't know how much the original fee is because Brighton don't disclose it, how do we know that the profit is as big as we're thinking it is?
Well, you have to disclose your total profit from player sales in the annual accounts.
Oh, right, okay.
And then you can sort of back work. You know that in a certain season they sold Dan Burnell, and the next season it was Mopay, and so on. So you can sort of prescribe figures to players. But I know that they don't like disclosing anything more than they have to, and I think they were actually quite miffed when Graham Potter went to Chelsea, which was just over a year ago. They didn't particularly want to have to reveal that they made £22 million in terms of compensation for him going to Chelsea for those many, many months.
All right. Our last question, Kieran, comes from Chris Elms. And Chris says, I love the show. Thank you, Chris. It's very kind of you. While I, of course, follow all the intricacies of the accountancy discussions and could easily ask an incisive question about amortisation, I actually want to know if Kieran can explain when he uses monies as opposed to money. On a recent pod, he mentioned the monies distributed to the EFL clubs, but I've heard him use both, apparently interchangeably. Is there a system? Kieran, before we answer this question, can you remember the fuss? It's always difficult to second guess what is going to agitate our listeners. Can you remember the 2 days of Twitter fuss we had about what the plural of euro was, whether you should say €1 million or €1 million? And apparently both are valid, so just let's not try to go down that particular pathway, Kieran, can we, if possible?
Well, Chris, there is no right answer.
You've been talking to that bloody lawyer again, haven't you?
That's right. The answer is a classic it depends. I'm probably the least qualified person to speak on this. As somebody that failed my English O-level in 1978, and it was nothing to do with you, Miss Waldron. It was all to do with me. My vocabulary has never been particularly brilliant. I still nervously try to work out, is it stadiums or is it stadia, for example, the plural of stadium. Yeah. But I did look this up, and as far as money is concerned, it is deemed to be what we refer to as a mass plural noun. So therefore, both money and monies are valid, but it is common in certain industries and in certain scenarios, which happens to be the financial and the legal industries, to use the word monies. You then have a debate as to should monies be spelt MONEYS or MONIES. Is this what, as I never go to pubs because I don't drink, is this what people genuinely talk about when they're sort of sitting around a table?
Kieran, you've been to the Parsons Arms a couple of times, Kieran. Yes, I don't think even Julian Chenery would give the time of day to, and he would talk to anyone about anything. But I think there'd be short shrift if the conversation got so dull that somebody went, Is it MONIES or MONEYS? And then somebody would say, well, you wouldn't know because you never buy a drink, so let's move on. Basically. Kieran, you've got very good vocabulary. Don't put yourself down, my dear friend. You're very good with all words and stuff like that. Thank you to everyone who has donated to the pod via our Patreon page. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to the pod as well, that would be very kind of you. And you'll get access to our chat community and our regular quizzes. And you can do that by going to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. Tickets are available now. They are selling well, so you need to get in quite quickly for those 3 dates in our little autumn tour, and we'll be announcing spring tour quite soon. So we'll be in the Winter Gardens in Blackpool on October the 12th for our book launch, the Lowry Theatre in Salford on October the 22nd, and the Royal Yacht on Jersey, which has now been confirmed is not a yacht, Kieran. There is some conjecture, but people on Jersey very kindly sent us a photograph. They probably wouldn't send me a photograph after I accused them all of being half French, but That wasn't in a bad way. I'd love to be half French. But that's November the 7th. To get your tickets, go to priceoffootball.com, and now I'm going to get loads of stick from my Irish cousins who are going, what's wrong with being half Irish? And then if I say, well, I want to be half Irish and half French, my English cousins, it's a minefield, Kieran, of my own creating. All of my own creating. And finally, if you'd like to pre-order our new book, Unfit and Improper Persons, An Idiot's Guide to Owning a Football Club, or one of our other books, or get yourself a Price of Football t-shirt, you can also find details on the website, and that's priceoffootball.com. We'll be back with a news pod on Thursday, which I wish I could say won't include stories about our free clubs in the Northeast there, but I already know that they will, unfortunately. In the meantime, now I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, thank you to everybody for all the support. And I can also confirm that one of our recent guests on the show, Chloe Horrocks from Manchester United, is going to be a guest at the Salford Lowry. And if you want to find out who's the least reliable person in terms of remembering to bring their passport, what's the biggest plane? Is it true, the story that they once took the Champions League trophy, they had to put it in business class because it was so big when they were transporting it? Chloe will be giving all of those stories and more at the Lowry, and Chloe will be an absolutely fantastic guest. There are other ways to support the show, and that's to give us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever vehicle you use to download your podcasts. It helps us in the charts. It helps us with algorithms. It helps us to book guests such as Chloe. They tend to look around and say, how many reviews? Most people seem to like the show. So thank you very much for that. It doesn't matter what you actually say as far as the impact on the algorithm is concerned in terms of your review. You could even say you would rather have the show presented by Dan Wootton and Martin Branning. And I suspect that could be a single-voiced show and rather brief.
What's the phone number of that secret lawyer, Kieran? Just in case. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.